The sun was slowly setting behind the golden hills of Fort Worth, painting the sky with shades of orange, pink, and soft gold. A warm breeze carried the faint scent of dry grass and horses, making the whole ranch feel peaceful. Samuel McCrae, a strong man in his early 40s with sun-tanned skin and kind but serious eyes, stood near the corral, wiping sweat from his forehead. It had been a long day. The cattle had been restless, the summer heat unforgiving, and the fence out by the creek still needed fixing. Samuel lived alone on his ranch, far away from the busy town. People knew him as quiet and honest. He spent most of his days working with the land and the animals, rarely going into town unless it was for supplies. He liked it that way. Life on the ranch was simple, steady, and predictable. At least it had always been. That evening felt different, though he couldn't explain why. The air carried a kind of heaviness that didn't belong. The horses had been uneasy since noon. They snorted and stamped their hooves for no reason, ears twitching at sounds only they seemed to hear. Even the dogs kept looking toward the dusty trail that led down from the hills. Samuel leaned on the wooden fence and watched the sun dip lower. The soft orange light touched the dry grass, turning it to gold. He almost convinced himself that everything was normal. But then he heard it, faint at first. The sound of hooves. Slow, uneven, and hesitant. It wasn't one of his horses. Samuel straightened and narrowed his eyes. A single figure was moving along the trail, almost blending into the orange glow. As it came closer, he saw that it wasn't a rider on a horse. It was a woman. She was walking, almost stumbling, down the path toward the ranch. Her dress, once light blue, was covered in dust and torn at the edges, as though she had traveled a long way. Her brown hair hung loose around her shoulders, and in the fading light her pale face stood out sharply. Samuel stepped forward, cautious but not unkind. He had seen travelers before, people who got lost on their way to town or ran out of supplies on the trail. But there was something about this woman that made his heartbeat quicken, not in fear but in a strange, uneasy way. When she reached the gate, she held on to it for a moment to steady herself. Her breath came fast as if she had been running. She lifted her head and their eyes met for the first time. Samuel saw a kind of fear in her eyes that he had never seen before. It wasn't the fear of wild animals or bad weather. It was deeper, quieter, and far more unsettling, ma'am, he called out gently, stepping closer. Are you all right? She didn't answer at first. Her trembling fingers clutched something at her throat. As she stepped into the lantern light hanging by the barn door, Samuel saw it clearly. A thin leather cord tied tightly around her neck, like a necklace. It looked worn and old, the kind of leather that had seen many years. The woman swallowed hard, as if the cord made it hard for her to speak. Her voice finally came out, soft but urgent. Please, she whispered. Don't take it off. Samuel stopped mid-step. Her words hung in the air like a quiet echo. I beg you, she added, her voice trembling. Don't ever take it off. Samuel felt a shiver run through him, even though the air was still warm. He didn't know what to say. He looked at her again. She wasn't holding a weapon. She didn't look dangerous. In fact, she looked frightened, exhausted, and desperate. But those words, those 5 strange words, had changed the air around them. He gently opened the gate and stepped aside, giving her room to enter. Come on in, he said softly. You look tired. You can rest here a while. She hesitated, glancing back down the trail as if something or someone might be following her. Only when she was sure nothing was there did she step through the gate. Samuel led her toward the porch where an old wooden chair waited. She sank into it like someone who had carried a heavy weight for far too long. Samuel fetched a tin cup of water from the bucket by the door and handed it to her. She held it with shaky hands, then drank as if every drop mattered. Her eyes flicked around nervously, taking in the barn, the corral, the lantern light, the long stretch of silent land beyond. She looked like someone who didn't feel safe anywhere, not even in the open air. What's your name, ma'am? Samuel asked, keeping his voice gentle. Clara, she whispered. Well, Clara, you can rest here tonight, he told her. No need to worry. You're safe on this ranch. She nodded slowly, but her fingers never left the leather cord around her neck. She rubbed it like someone holding on to the only thing keeping them steady. Samuel had never seen anyone wear something so plain with so much care. There was no fancy pendant, no charm, just a knot and a piece of old leather. The horses made a soft, uneasy sound again. Clara turned sharply toward the corral, her face tightening. Samuel noticed how her shoulders tensed at every noise. It wasn't the way someone acted after a long journey. It was the way someone acted when they were being followed or haunted by something they couldn't explain. "Long way from town?" Samuel asked, trying to make conversation. She nodded. "I came through the hills," she said softly. "Had to keep off the road." "Off the road? Why's that?" Her lips pressed together as if the words were too heavy to say. Finally, she looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. "It follows the road," she said simply. Samuel frowned. "What does?" She shook her head. "It doesn't matter. All that matters is this." Her hand lifted the leather cord slightly, then let it drop back against her throat. "Don't take it off." Her voice had changed. It was still soft, but now it carried something else, something firm. A warning. A promise. A quiet kind of fear that had shaped itself into a rule she lived by. Samuel didn't know what to make of it. He had heard many strange stories over the years from travelers and ranch hands. Stories about old mines, lights in the hills, whispers in the wind. He never gave them much thought. But looking at Clara now, he couldn't call her a liar. The fear in her eyes wasn't the kind that could be faked. "All right," Samuel said slowly, raising his hands a little. "No one's going to take it off." She let out a breath she didn't even know she'd been holding. Her shoulders dropped a little, though her eyes still scanned the horizon. As the sky turned darker, Samuel lit another lantern on the porch. The crickets began their evening song. Somewhere far off, a coyote called out into the night. It was the same sound Samuel had heard for years, but tonight even the ordinary felt strange. He offered her some food from the kitchen, bread and beans, simple but warm. She ate slowly, like someone who hadn't had a proper meal in days. Every few bites she paused and listened to the night sounds. Her hand always went back to the cord. Not once did she let it out of her grasp. "You can sleep inside," Samuel told her. "Guest room's clean. Bed's soft enough." Clara looked toward the door, then back at him. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "But if anything happens, promise me you won't touch it." Samuel nodded, even though he didn't fully understand. "I promise." She stood carefully, as if every step required thought, and followed him inside. The small wooden house smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. It wasn't much, but it was warm and safe. Samuel showed her the guest room and left her there with a lantern. But even after he returned to his own room, sleep didn't come easily. He lay in bed staring at the wooden ceiling, listening to the quiet creaks of the house settling into the night. Through the thin walls, he could hear Clara pacing slowly. Every now and then he caught the sound of her whispering something soft, maybe to herself, maybe to the night outside. The horses shifted restlessly in the corral. The dogs, usually asleep by now, stayed near the porch, ears raised, eyes toward the hills. Samuel sat up and went to the window. The moon was rising pale and cold. The land stretched out before him, silent and still. But that stillness felt like the moment before a storm, a quiet that wasn't natural. Down the hall, Clara's pacing stopped. A single sound broke the silence, a faint tap, 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 like something light brushing against the window pane. Samuel froze. He told himself it was just the wind. The wind often played tricks on the mind out here. But then he saw her silhouette through the doorway. She was standing near the window in her room, shoulders stiff, hand tight around that leather cord. Her face was pale in the moonlight, her lips moving in a silent prayer. Samuel wanted to ask what she had run from, what had made her so afraid. But something deep inside told him that it wasn't time yet. Some stories he knew had to reveal themselves slowly. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the tall grass. The ranch seemed to hold its breath. Clara turned slightly, met his gaze from across the hall, and whispered again, "Don't take it off." And then the lantern light flickered. Samuel didn't know it yet, but that single warning would change everything he believed about the quiet, simple life on his ranch. The night grew still. A pale moonlight stretched across the land like a silver blanket, covering the barn, the corral, and the fields beyond. Samuel sat by the window with his old lamp burning low, listening to the quiet rhythm of the wind. He had lived on this ranch for many years, but that night felt like something was gently pressing against the world, as if the air itself was listening. Clara had gone quiet in the guest room. For a while, he thought she might have finally fallen, asleep, but every now and then he heard a soft creak like someone shifting their weight carefully. He knew she was awake, standing by the window just like before. Samuel rubbed his hands together slowly, trying to calm the uneasy feeling in his chest. He had promised not to touch that leather cord around her neck, and though the thought puzzled him, he had meant what he said. But his mind kept returning to her words. Don't take it off. Why would anyone say something like that with so much fear in their eyes? A sudden thump came from outside. Samuel straightened. It wasn't loud, but clear enough to make the horses in the corral snort and shuffle. He reached for his lantern, stepped onto the porch, and scanned the yard. The night was clear, the stars bright, but the field seemed to be wrapped in a stillness that felt a little too perfect. The dogs were standing near the fence, tails stiff, heads lowered. They weren't barking. That was the strange part. Normally, if something approached the ranch, they barked loud enough to wake the hills. Tonight, they only watched. Easy now, Samuel whispered to them. He walked slowly toward the barn, the soft crunch of gravel under his boots echoing in the quiet night. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. But the air felt different, like the moment before a summer storm when everything holds its breath. When he returned to the porch, Clara was standing at the door, her hands gripping the frame. Her eyes were wide and alert. She hadn't made a sound, but she looked as if she had been watching everything. It's close, she whispered. Samuel frowned. What is? Her gaze didn't move from the fields. It doesn't like light, she said softly. But it's there. Samuel felt the weight of her words settle deep in his chest. He had heard many stories growing up, old tales about the land, about things that moved when no one was watching. He never believed any of them. But Clara didn't look like someone telling stories. She looked like someone who had spent a long time trying to escape something she couldn't explain. Come inside, Samuel said gently. She stepped back, still clutching the leather cord. Her fingers had left faint marks on the skin around it. It wasn't just an object to her. It was a line between safety and fear. They sat in the small kitchen with the lantern burning brighter than usual. The warm glow filled the room, but outside, the night pressed against the windows like a quiet ocean. Samuel poured her a little warm milk from the stove. She held the cup with both hands but barely drank. Her eyes kept flicking toward the window. Clara, Samuel began carefully. What's really going on? What's out there? She closed her eyes for a moment, as if choosing each word mattered. I can't explain it the way I want to, she said softly. It doesn't have a name, it doesn't follow like a person. It waits, it listens, and when you forget, it moves closer. Samuel didn't speak. He let her continue, her voice a soft thread in the silence. It came the first night after I found this, she said, touching the leather cord. It was in an old trunk near the river. I thought it was just a piece of string. But the woman who used to live out there, she tied it around her neck and never took it off. I didn't understand then. I thought it was just a story, but when I put it away, it came to my door. Her breath caught slightly, and she looked down at the cup, as if the warm milk could anchor her in that moment. So I put it back on, she said, and it stayed away. It doesn't like it. This little piece of leather is the only thing it listens to. Samuel leaned back slightly, feeling the quiet settle heavier than before. He didn't believe in invisible things, but he did believe in what fear looked like in a person's eyes. And Clara's fear was real. You can stay as long as you need, he said quietly. We'll figure something out. She gave him a small, tired smile. Thank you, she whispered. But her hand never left the cord. Hours passed. The house sank deeper into the kind of silence that only comes in the middle of the night, when time itself seems to slow down. Samuel sat in his chair by the lamp trying to rest his eyes, but every small sound, the wind against the wall, the rustle of grass, made his heart beat a little faster. Then, just before dawn, something changed. A faint tapping touched the window again, the same sound he'd heard before. Tap, 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 not hard, not loud, just soft enough to let him know it was there. Samuel opened his eyes, his hand tightening around the armrest. He turned slowly toward the sound. Clara was already standing, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor, her face pale in the low light. "It found us," she whispered. The tapping stopped. The silence after it was louder than the sound itself. Clara backed away from the window, her fingers tightening on the leather cord. Samuel stood, unsure what to do. He wasn't the kind of man who ran from noises in the night. He had faced storms, wild animals, and long winters. But this was different. It wasn't something he could chase away, and then something unexpected happened. The lantern flickered. Once, twice, then steadied again. But in that brief flicker, Samuel saw Clara's face, her expression caught between fear and decision. She reached for the cord as if testing it, as if wondering what would happen if it wasn't there. "Clara," he said carefully, "don't." But her hand kept trembling around the knot. She looked at him, tears filling her eyes. "I can't keep it on forever," she whispered. "I thought I could, but it gets heavier every day. It's not just leather, Samuel. It holds things back, but it also holds me." Samuel took a small step closer, unsure if he should stop her or just listen. The morning light was still far away, and the night seemed endless. She breathed deeply and slowly untied the knot. The sound was barely there, a soft slide of leather against skin. The second the cord loosened, Clara froze. The air in the room seemed to shift, like a gust of cold wind had passed through without opening a door. The lantern light dimmed slightly but didn't go out. Clara's hands fell to her sides. Her face became still, not frightened, not calm, just still. Samuel's heart thudded against his chest. He didn't know what he expected to see, but the stillness was the worst part of it. Outside, the dogs began to whine softly. Not barking, not growling, just a low sound like they could sense something they couldn't explain. The horses shuffled again, hooves tapping nervously. The whole ranch seemed to lean toward the house, listening. Samuel bent down slowly, picked up the leather cord from the floor and held it in his hand. It was warm, like it had been holding a heartbeat. For a moment he didn't move. He simply stared at it, at how plain and simple it looked. Just a strip of leather, nothing more. But Clara's eyes were fixed on the window. She whispered something too soft for him to catch. The faint light of early dawn began to paint the sky outside in a dull silver. And then, the pressure in the room lifted. Not suddenly, but gently, like a weight rolling off the shoulders of the night. The dogs grew quiet, the horses calmed, the lantern stopped flickering. Samuel didn't understand it, but he felt it. The invisible shift, the silence that came after something had passed. Clara slowly turned back to him. She looked tired, but her shoulders weren't as tense. Her voice was a whisper. "It's gone," she said. Samuel didn't ask where it had gone or why. Some answers he felt weren't meant to be understood, only lived through. He handed the leather cord back to her, but she shook her head. "I don't need it now," she said softly. "It only follows until dawn. It always leaves when the light comes." Samuel looked down at the simple strip of leather in his hand. He thought of the way she had carried it, the way she had whispered to the night, the way the whole ranch had held its breath. This piece of leather wasn't just a thing. It was a story, one he might never fully understand. They stepped outside together as the sun finally rose over the hills. The golden light spread across the land, chasing away the last chill of the night. Clara closed her eyes and breathed in deeply as if she hadn't taken a full breath in days. Samuel watched her, realizing that whatever had followed her, whatever she had been running from, had stayed in the darkness. The dogs lay down again. The horses lowered their heads and began to graze. Everything slowly returned to the quiet life Samuel knew. But something deep in his heart told him he would never forget this night. Clara stayed at the ranch for a few more days. She helped with the horses, mended a few fences, and laughed a little more each day. She never tied the leather cord back around her neck, Instead, she placed it on the porch rail one morning and left it there, letting the wind move it gently. Samuel never asked her what exactly had followed her. She never explained. But sometimes, late at night when the moon hung low and silver, Samuel thought about the tapping on the window, the soft flicker of the lantern, and the way the world seemed to hold its breath.